Pharaohs were publicly mocked and Roman emperors lampooned on stage. The ancient world was far funnier than you think. We often see these societies as stern and serious, but humor and satire were actually powerful forces that shaped politics, social norms, and even religion. This journey uncovers the hidden jokes and subversive comedies that reveal a side of history rarely taught. You will discover how laughter served as a weapon against authority, a glue for communities, and a vital tool for survival. By the end, you will see the timeless human impulse to laugh at power, connecting you directly to the wit of your ancient ancestors. How did a joke ever bring down a politician? What did people laugh about when no one was writing it down? What is the one thing that has always united humanity across every empire and era? But what did laughter actually sound like in a world without recorded sound or mass media? It was a complex language of its own, far richer than simple punchlines. Ancient humor was not a single thing but a spectrum, stretching from the rowdy, physical comedy of a Roman street performance to the subtle, intellectual satire exchanged between Egyptian scholars. On one end, you had the mimes, performers who relied on exaggerated gestures, slapstick falls, and crude masks to get a laugh from a crowded marketplace. Their comedy was immediate and visceral, a universal language of tripping and mockery that required no translation. At the same time, in the quiet of a library, a scribe might pen a witty poem poking fun at a lazy carpenter or a greedy official, using clever wordplay that only the literate elite would fully appreciate. This was satire in its earliest form, a sharp tool for social commentary. As the classicist Mary Beard suggests, to truly hear this ancient laughter, we must quiet our own modern sensibilities. Jokes that centered on bodily functions or public humiliation were not considered lowbrow, but were often central to religious festivals and civic celebrations. This foundational understanding that comedy could be both sacred and profane prepares us to step into its first great arena, the theatrical stage, where humor was unleashed on a massive public scale. This sanctioned mockery reached its zenith with the playwright Aristophanes. In his comedy The Clouds, he did not merely reference the philosopher Socrates, he placed a caricature of the man center stage. This stage Socrates was not a wise seeker of truth but a buffoon, suspended in a basket to study the air, running a fraudulent school called the Thinkery where he taught students how to use clever words to argue that wrong is right. The audience roared with laughter at this absurd portrayal, a direct and very public challenge to the intellectual trends shaping Athenian youth. Even more audacious was his attack on the politician Cleon, the most powerful man in Athens at the time. In the Knights, Aristophanes portrayed Cleon as a corrupt and blustering sausage seller who had bamboozled the elderly character representing the Athenian people. The insults were so personal and the portrayal so vicious that legend says no actor was brave enough to play the part, forcing Aristophanes to perform it himself. This was not subtle commentary. It was a full-blown comedic assault delivered before the entire city. Think about the sheer audacity of that moment. In the middle of a costly war, a comedian could stand before thousands of his fellow citizens and call their most influential leader a deceitful clown, and not only get away with it but win a prize. This freedom was a hallmark of the radical democracy Athens practiced. The theater became a second assembly, a place where policy was debated not with dry speeches, but with ridiculous costumes and crude jokes. It served as a crucial pressure release, allowing citizens to laugh at their leaders and the stresses of war, thereby strengthening the social fabric. This Athenian model, where humor was a civic duty, stands in stark contrast to what would follow in the vast autocratic empire of Rome, where the rules of the game changed dramatically. In Rome, the laughter took on a sharper, more personal edge. While the Greeks had used the stage for public satire, Roman poets perfected the art of the written attack, turning satire into a mirror held up to the follies of everyday life. Two names came to define the entire spectrum of this new art form, Horace and Juvenal, whose approaches were as different as a friendly nudge and a punch to the gut. Horace believed in gentle mockery. He wrote with a knowing smile, poking fun at universal human weaknesses like greed, vanity, and social climbing. His goal was not to destroy his subjects but to correct them, to use wit as a teacher uses a pointer, guiding his readers toward better behavior. He argued that laughter could succeed where stern moralizing failed, making the medicine of truth easier to swallow. Juvenal, writing over a century later, had no such patience for gentle correction. He looked upon the sprawling, decadent empire of the first century and saw only corruption and hypocrisy. His satire was born of fury, a literary scream of indignation. He lashed out at the newly rich who flaunted their wealth, at corrupt politicians who sold their influence, and at the moral decay he believed was rotting Roman society from within. It is from this cauldron of anger that one of history's most enduring questions emerged in a new satirical light. He asked, "Who watches the watchman?" a line dripping with sarcasm aimed at the palace guards, who were themselves part of the very corruption they were supposed to prevent. This was not a philosophical inquiry but a bitter accusation, showing how Roman satire could give voice to the deepest public anxieties. The journey from Horace's charming wit to Juvenal's blistering rage demonstrates the incredible versatility of satire. It could be a subtle tool for social refinement or a weapon of mass critique, proving that laughter was just as potent in the quiet of a study as it was in the roar of a theater. And this literary power was about to meet the raw energy of the Roman streets, where humor was not just read but seen, heard, and felt by everyone. While the sharp words of Juvenal were read by the educated elite, a far more public and democratic form of mockery was taking shape in the heart of Rome itself. On a street corner stood an ancient, weathered statue, a fragment of a forgotten hero. The locals had named it Pasquino, and on certain mornings this statue would speak. Overnight, anonymous citizens would pin short, biting poems to its marble base, verses that lampooned the Pope, his cardinals, and any powerful figure who had drawn public scorn. These were the Pasquinades, the anonymous social media of their day, a bulletin board for the grievances of the common person. The humor was swift and sharp, a verbal dagger aimed at the powerful. One famous Pasquinade, directed at a particularly unpopular pope, read simply, "What the barbarians did not do, the Barberini did." This was a brilliant, layered insult mocking Pope Urban VIII, whose family name was Barberini, for stripping bronze from the Pantheon to build his own lavish projects, implying his destruction of Rome's heritage was worse than any ancient invasion. The statue provided a perfect shield. How could you arrest a poem pinned to a piece of stone? This tradition gave voice to the voiceless, allowing for a continuous, critical commentary on the ruling class that the formal systems of power could not easily suppress. It was a safety valve, a way for public anger to be released through laughter rather than rebellion, proving that even in an autocratic system, the human need to mock arrogance could not be fully extinguished. This vibrant culture of public ridicule raises a profound question. What happens when a society lacks such outlets, when the powerful leave no room for laughter at their expense? To find the answer, we must travel to a civilization where the ruler was not just a political leader, but a living god. But even the most rigid power structures could not entirely suppress the human instinct for a well-timed joke. In the shadow of the pyramids within the formal court of the pharaoh, laughter had its own carefully prescribed role. This was not the chaotic satire of Rome, but a controlled, almost ritualized form of humor. Tomb paintings and administrative papyri reveal a surprising figure, the court jester. These were often dwarves or individuals with physical differences who held a unique position of privilege. They could clown and cavort in ways no one else dared, performing physical gags and light-hearted routines that broke the intense solemnity of court life. Their humor, however, was almost never aimed at the pharaoh himself. Instead, it served to highlight his greatness by contrast. By providing a moment of levity, the jester's antics made the divine king's gravity seem even more profound, reinforcing the social order rather than threatening it. This was humor as a tool of the state, a safety valve that released tension without ever questioning the source of the pressure. A more subtle form of Egyptian wit appears in what scholars call wisdom literature. The most famous example is the Satire of the Trades, a text used to teach young scribes the value of their own profession. It does this not through dry lecture, but through hilarious, exaggerated descriptions of every other job. The potter is covered in mud worse than a pig. The fisherman is in constant peril from crocodiles. The soldier marches until his feet are raw and his back is broken. Each profession is painted as a comic nightmare of drudgery and filth, all to build up to the punchline: the scribe's life is the best life of all. This was humor with a very clear social purpose, promoting literacy and bureaucratic loyalty by making every other career path seem laughably miserable. It was a form of in-group bonding, using mockery to solidify the status of the educated elite. This top-down, controlled use of comedy presents a stark contrast to the rebellious spirit of Athenian theater or the anonymous barbs of Pasquinades. In Egypt, laughter was largely co-opted by power, a carefully managed spectacle that ultimately upheld the pharaoh's divine authority. This leads to a crucial question. If the state so effectively managed humor from the top, what did laughter sound like among the people who built the pyramids, the farmers, the laborers, the vast majority of Egyptians whose voices were rarely recorded? Their jokes, told in the fields and in the taverns, are almost entirely lost to history, the true silent majority of ancient comedy. Yet for every jest told in the pharaoh's court or the poet's study, 1,000 more echoed in the fields, the workshops, and the taverns. This was the true sound of ancient laughter, a vibrant world of folk humor created by and for the common people. It was a humor of survival, passed down not in ink but through memory and song. Imagine a farmer in Mesopotamia, working under a relentless sun, sharing a riddle about the very river that both sustained and flooded his land, or a group of women weaving cloth in a Celtic village, singing a bawdy song about a lazy chieftain. These were not grand satires aimed at changing policy, but intimate jokes that strengthened community bonds and made daily burdens feel lighter. They provided a crucial psychological release valve, a way to laugh in the face of hardship. The ultimate folk hero across countless cultures was the trickster, a figure who used wit, not strength, to triumph. In West African tales, the clever spider Anansi would outsmart a powerful leopard. In Native American stories, Coyote would play pranks on the gods themselves. These characters resonated deeply because they represented a fantasy of the underdog winning, a symbolic victory for everyone who felt powerless. Their success was a temporary, cathartic reversal of the rigid social order, allowing people to enjoy, for just a moment, the idea of the mighty being humbled by the clever. Archaeology offers us rare, direct whispers of this popular wit. Scratched onto a wall in Pompeii is a simple piece of graffiti that reads, "I marvel, O wall, that you have not fallen down, since you have to bear the weight of so many boring scribblers." It is a joke within a joke, a meta-commentary on the very act of graffiti that feels startlingly modern. Another Pompeian inscription bluntly mocks a local official named Marcus Serenius, claiming he drinks his wine pure like a fish, a clear jab at his supposed alcoholism. This is not the refined satire of Juvenal. It is a raw, public shout of mockery from a nameless citizen. These finds are priceless because they are unfiltered, capturing the immediate, everyday humor of people who were never meant to be heard by history. This bedrock of popular laughter did more than just entertain. It was the raw material from which formal comedy was eventually carved, and its influence extended even into the most sacred spaces of the ancient world. The line between a joke and a prayer was often much thinner than we might assume. Even the gods themselves were not above a good joke. Far from the stern, distant figures we sometimes imagine, the deities of ancient myth were often deeply funny, engaging in pranks, deceptions, and witty banter that made them startlingly human. This divine laughter was not a sign of disrespect, but a crucial feature of how people understood their world. The unpredictable chaos of life, from a sudden storm to a fortunate windfall, could be explained through the capricious and often humorous actions of the gods. In Norse legends, the trickster Loki is the ultimate agent of chaos. His schemes are a constant source of trouble and comedy, like the time he cut off the goddess Sif's beautiful hair as a prank, only to have to desperately bargain with dwarves to craft a magical replacement. Yet his humor always has an edge, a lesson lurking within the laughter. His antics frequently spiral into events with cosmic consequences, reminding listeners that even divine jokes can have a serious price, blending entertainment with a warning about the dangers of unchecked mischief. The Greek pantheon was equally filled with humorous escapades. One of the most charming stories involves the infant god Hermes. On the very day he was born, he did not merely take his first steps, he invented the lyre from a tortoise shell, then promptly sneaked out and stole the sacred cattle of his older brother, Apollo. He covered his tracks by making the cattle walk backwards so their hoofprints would lead in the wrong direction. When a furious Apollo finally confronted him, the baby Hermes did not cower. Instead, he used his wit and charm, offering the newly created lyre as a peace offering. Apollo, disarmed by the beautiful music and the infant's audacity, burst into laughter and forgave him. This story is more than a cute myth. It is a complex tale that uses humor to explore themes of cleverness, negotiation, and the birth of new arts. It makes the gods relatable, showing that even divine families have their squabbles and moments of reconciliation. This presence of humor in the most sacred of stories reveals a profound truth about ancient worldviews. Laughter was not separate from the divine order, it was woven into its very fabric. The world was unpredictable, and so were the gods who ruled it. Their humorous escapades provided a framework for understanding fortune and misfortune, making the cosmos feel less like a cold machine and more like a dramatic and sometimes comedic family affair. By seeing their gods laugh, ancient people gave themselves permission to find humor in their own struggles, recognizing it as a fundamental force of nature. This sacred acceptance of comedy provided a powerful foundation for its use in a far more earthly domain, the theater of politics, where rulers would soon learn to harness laughter for their own purposes. Within the legendary library of Alexandria, where knowledge was gathered from across the known world, intellectual battles were fought not with swords but with stinging verses. The great poets of the Hellenistic era, men like Callimachus, turned satire into a scalpel, performing delicate surgery on the reputations of their rivals. Their weapon of choice was the epigram, a short, intensely concentrated poem that could deliver a devastating insult with the precision of a master craftsman. These were not the broad, public comedies of Aristophanes aimed at a political crowd, but private, literary grenades tossed between scholars in a war over the soul of poetry itself. The central conflict pitted Callimachus, who championed short, polished, and meticulously crafted poems, against those who favored the traditional, long-winded epic style. He famously declared that a big book was a big nuisance, and he used his wit to attack poets he considered bloated and unoriginal. In one cutting epigram, he doesn't just criticize a rival's work, he mocks the very material it's written on, suggesting that a bad poet's scrolls are only fit for being wrapping paper for fish at the market. This was more than an insult, it was a philosophical statement about art, quality, and value. These poetic duels were the social media feuds of their day, a high-stakes game where a perfectly phrased jab could make or break a career within the elite circles of patronage. The humor here was elitist, accessible only to those deeply versed in literary technique, yet it served the same fundamental purpose as a joke shouted in the Roman Forum. It was a tool for establishing dominance, defining in-groups and out-groups, and controlling the cultural conversation. This refined, academic satire proves that laughter could be just as potent in a library as in a tavern, a versatile force that adapted to every level of society. It reveals a crucial evolution, showing humor being consciously wielded not just for rebellion or release, but as an instrument of cultural power and social control. This literary battlefield in the library reveals a darker truth about ancient wit. For all its liberating power, laughter always had a cost, and the line between a celebrated jester and an exiled poet was dangerously thin. The freedom enjoyed by Aristophanes in democratic Athens was the exception, not the rule. Even he did not operate with total impunity. Historical records suggest he faced lawsuits, likely from the powerful men he skewered on stage. His success was a precarious dance, dependent on a cultural moment that valued public critique as a pillar of citizenship. In the autocratic atmosphere of Rome, the stakes were infinitely higher. The poet Ovid, a master of love and myth, provides the most chilling example. In the year 8, the Emperor Augustus banished him to the remote shores of the Black Sea, a virtual death sentence for a man of letters. Ovid cryptically blamed his exile on a poem and a mistake. While the exact cause remains one of history's great mysteries, many scholars point to the transgressive, satirical edge in his work, perhaps mocking the emperor's strict moral reforms. A joke that once earned applause in Athens could lead to ruin in Rome. This vulnerability was magnified by the personality of the ruler on the throne. An emperor like Augustus might tolerate a certain amount of wit, but his successor, Domitian, was notoriously paranoid. He executed a senator for simply staging a play about a king, seeing a dangerous parallel where none may have been intended. Under such a ruler, satire did not just risk a fine, it risked a death sentence. This constant, unpredictable tension between expression and repression is the clearest sign of how seriously the ancients took the power of a joke. It was never just entertainment, it was a political act. The fact that rulers felt the need to silence mockery proves they understood its ability to undermine their authority. This dangerous game underscores a final, crucial function of ancient humor, one that moved beyond rebellion and into the foundational task of shaping young minds. Even the most brilliant minds of antiquity could not agree on the fundamental value of a laugh. Plato viewed unrestrained laughter as a dangerous threat to the soul's harmony. In his vision of a perfectly ordered republic, he proposed strict censorship of comedy in poetry and theater. He feared that laughing at ridiculous characters on stage would inevitably strengthen the same foolish impulses within ourselves, eroding the self-control essential for a just citizen. For Plato, humor was a siren's call away from reason, a chaotic force that could mock the very pursuit of truth itself. His student, Aristotle, offered a more measured, almost clinical analysis. He framed humor within his famous doctrine of the golden mean, the ideal middle ground between extremes. He defined virtuous wit as the balance between the buffoon, who jokes excessively and at inappropriate times, and the boorish man, who never jokes at all and is offended by laughter. For Aristotle, the ability to engage in clever, well-timed humor was a mark of a refined character. More importantly, he saw comedy as serving a vital social function, a form of catharsis. Just as tragedy purged pity and fear through drama, comedy allowed citizens to safely release tensions and ridicule human flaws in a collective, therapeutic experience. This ancient philosophical divide reveals a tension that still resonates today. Is laughter a civilizing tool that forges social bonds and highlights absurdity? Or is it a primal, disruptive energy that tears down decorum and rational thought? The fact that Plato and Aristotle were debating this over 2,000 years ago proves that the power of a joke was never taken lightly. Their arguments would echo through the centuries, influencing how later societies, from medieval scholars to Enlightenment thinkers, would wrestle with the ethics of satire and the proper place of humor in a well-ordered world. This philosophical debate over laughter's value highlights a very practical problem we face today. How do we actually understand an ancient joke? The distance is not just measured in years, but in a vast gap of shared experience. A pun that had a Roman audience howling with laughter might today be met with complete silence, its meaning locked away by time. The challenge of cross-cultural humor is perhaps the single greatest obstacle to truly hearing the laughter of the past. It is not enough to simply translate the words. We must decode the entire cultural context that gave the joke its power. Take the Philogelos or the Laughter Lover, one of the world's oldest surviving joke books. Many of its entries are built around stock characters like the egghead, a pedantic intellectual who takes everything literally. One joke tells of an egghead who sees a slave being beaten and asks, "What did he do to deserve that?" He is told the slave broke a jar. The egghead replies, "Then it makes sense. He broke the jar, so they break his head." The humor relies entirely on recognizing the stereotype of the overly logical scholar who misses the human tragedy entirely. Another character is the Abderite, a proverbial simpleton from the city of Abdera. In one joke, an Abderite goes to a hot bath but finds it too crowded. He tells his slave, "Go home and stab me to death in the bath." The punchline hinges on knowing that Abderites were the ancient equivalent of the fool from a specific town, a cultural shorthand that has long since faded. Without that key, the joke seems nonsensical. Scholars must act as detectives, piecing together clues from history, art, and language to reconstruct the comic logic. This painstaking work reveals that humor was never just about the punchline. It was a mirror reflecting a society's deepest values, its stereotypes, and its unspoken anxieties. The fact that Romans laughed at absent-minded professors tells us something about their attitude towards intellectuals. Their jokes about simpletons from specific towns reveal the prejudices and regional rivalries that animated their world. Every decoded joke is a small window into the ancient mind, proving that what a culture finds funny is as revealing as what it finds sacred or terrifying. The clinking of cups and the low murmur of conversation filled the andron, the men's dining room. Here, at the heart of the Greek Symposium, humor was not merely entertainment, it was the essential currency of social life. After the meal was cleared, the elite male guests would recline on couches, diluting their wine with water and engaging in a sophisticated, often intense game of wit. This was a world governed by rules of hospitality and competition, where a well-timed joke or a clever verse could elevate a man's status as effectively as a successful military campaign. The ritual began with a libation to the gods, but it quickly turned to the affairs of men. Participants took turns reciting poetry, often improvising lines to praise a friend or, more daringly, to deliver a subtle jab at a rival. They sang scholia, drinking songs that carried a deceptive punch. These seemingly cheerful tunes were frequently layered with sharp political satire, allowing guests to voice criticisms of public figures from the safety of their private circle. A man might raise his cup and sing a line that everyone understood as a direct mockery of a general's recent failed strategy, all while maintaining a veneer of convivial celebration. This blend of wine, music, and coded language created a pressure valve for the competitive tensions inherent in Athenian aristocracy. It was a way to test boundaries, to assert dominance, and to negotiate social hierarchies without resorting to open conflict. The Symposium was a microcosm of the city-state itself, a place where humor enforced a shared identity among the powerful. By laughing together at common targets or admiring each other's verbal dexterity, these men reinforced the bonds that held their privileged class together. This carefully controlled environment, where laughter served as both a weapon and a glue, presents a stark contrast to the chaotic public revelry of popular festivals, where the rules of engagement were thrown to the wind. The Symposium's carefully coded wit was a world away from the public, chaotic release of Rome's greatest festival. Each December, the entire city surrendered to the Saturnalia, a holiday that systematically dismantled the very foundations of Roman society. For a few sanctioned days, the rigid social hierarchy that governed every aspect of life was not just ignored, it was ceremoniously flipped on its head. Masters would prepare a feast and serve it to their enslaved households. The stern paterfamilias, the absolute ruler of his family, might be playfully mocked by his own children without fear of punishment. Citizens swapped their formal togas for colorful, informal Greek dress, and the streets filled with the sounds of gambling, a normally forbidden activity, and boisterous celebration. This was not simple merrymaking, it was a state-sponsored festival of Misrule, a world turned upside down with the full blessing of the authorities. The genius of the Saturnalia was its function as a colossal pressure valve. The immense tensions built up over the year from the stark inequalities of a slave-owning society, from the absolute power of fathers and patrons, were given a controlled outlet. By allowing, even demanding, that everyone engage in this humorous inversion of roles, the festival provided a cathartic release. It was a way for society to collectively acknowledge the absurdity and strain of its own strictures, to laugh at them, and in doing so, to diffuse their potential for explosive rebellion. The temporary freedom made the return to normalcy feel almost like a relief, a return to a familiar, if restrictive, order. This ritualized rebellion ultimately reinforced the very system it seemed to challenge. After the days of license were over, the slaves returned to their duties and the masters resumed their command, the social contract momentarily tested but ultimately reaffirmed. The festival demonstrated a profound understanding of human nature, that sometimes the safest way to maintain power is to allow it to be laughed at on a very strict and public schedule. These jokes were not confined to papyrus or the stage, they were etched into the very walls people walked past every day. In the bustling streets of Pompeii, the humor of the common person survives, frozen in time by volcanic ash. A charcoal sketch on a tavern wall might show a local merchant with an absurdly large nose, a visual gag meant to be understood in an instant. Another piece of graffiti boasts loudly about a man's romantic conquests, only to be answered right beneath it by a rival scrawl calling him a liar. This was a living, breathing conversation, a public forum where wit was a form of social currency available to anyone who could wield a piece of charcoal. The jokes are immediate and personal, a stark contrast to the polished epigrams of the Library of Alexandria. They reveal a community where mocking your neighbor was as natural as greeting them. This visual wit extended far beyond graffiti into the objects people used in their homes. Greek potters were masters of this craft. A finely painted wine cup might depict the god Heracles not in a moment of heroic triumph, but stumbling drunkenly, supported by satyrs who mock his condition. On a storage jar, the epic battle between the pygmies and the cranes is rendered not as a terrifying war, but as a ridiculous skirmish between tiny men and comically long-legged birds. These were not mistakes or crude drawings, they were intentional comedic choices. By placing these humorous scenes on expensive pottery, the owners were making a statement. They were displaying not just wealth, but a certain sophistication, an ability to appreciate the lighter side of even their most sacred myths. The humor was baked into daily life at the most practical level. An oil lamp might be shaped like a comic actor's mask, its grotesque features illuminated by the very flame it held. A weight used in the market could be a small, carved figure of a sleeping baker, a gentle joke about laziness that everyone who bought bread would understand. These artifacts offer us something text alone cannot, a direct, unmediated glimpse into the ancient sense of the absurd. They prove that humor was not a rare entertainment but a constant presence, a lens through which people viewed their world, from the gods above to the clay lamp in their hand. Yet these everyday jokes and visual gags share a deeper, more ancient root, one that resonates across continents and cultures. The figure of the trickster is a universal constant in humanity's oldest stories, a character who embodies the very essence of subversive wit. Whether appearing as Anansi the spider in West African folklore or as Coyote in the tales of countless Native American peoples, the trickster is a fascinating paradox. They are neither purely hero nor outright villain, but a cunning, often amoral force of chaos who uses deception and cleverness to overturn the established order. Their humor is not for mere entertainment, it is a tool for survival and a challenge to authority. Anansi does not defeat the powerful leopard with strength, he outsmarts him, perhaps by weaving a web of lies or staging an elaborate ruse. Coyote does not bow to the gods, he plays pranks on them, stealing fire or rearranging the stars for his own amusement. These humorous exploits often served a dual purpose for the communities that told them. They explained the inexplicable, like why the rabbit has a short tail or why the seasons change, framing natural phenomena as the consequences of a trickster's wild antics. More importantly, they packaged vital moral lessons in a palatable, memorable form. The stories taught listeners about the dangers of hubris, as the trickster's schemes often backfire spectacularly, and the value of resourcefulness in a world full of larger, stronger forces. The trickster's greatest power was their ability to question everything. They mocked kings, tricked gods, and exposed the foolishness of conventional wisdom, all through the application of sharp intelligence. The enduring presence of this archetype, from the farthest reaches of Africa to the heart of North America, points to a fundamental human truth. It reveals a deep, shared appreciation for the mind's ability to triumph over muscle, and a universal understanding that laughter can be the most effective weapon for questioning, challenging, and ultimately redefining the boundaries of a rigid world. This belief in humor's power was not confined to the stage or the street. It also found a place in the ancient physician's toolkit. Long before modern medicine could measure endorphins, thinkers like the Greek Dr. Hippocrates observed a clear link between a patient's cheerful disposition and their recovery. He noted that a positive, hopeful state of mind often correlated with better outcomes, suggesting that the body and spirit were deeply intertwined. His successor, the renowned Roman physician Galen, expanded on this, carefully documenting how strong emotions, including joy, directly influenced physical health. They lacked our scientific vocabulary, but they understood the fundamental principle that laughter could be a genuine balm for both mind and body. This intuitive grasp of psychosomatic wellness connected directly to the highest goals of ancient philosophy. The Greek concept of euthymia, a state of serene tranquility, and the related ideal of ataraxia, a freedom from worry and distress, were seen as the pinnacle of human flourishing. A balanced sense of humor was considered a vital tool for reaching this state. It was the ability to laugh at life's inevitable absurdities and setbacks that prevented a person from being crushed by them. This was not about constant merriment, but about cultivating a perspective resilient enough to find light even in shadow. The ancients, in their wisdom, had already mapped the territory that modern science would later confirm, that the capacity for laughter is not a trivial distraction, but a profound component of our well-being, a medicine for the soul that requires no prescription. The laughter that echoed in the Athenian theater did not simply appear one day, fully formed. Its origins are far more primal, rooted in the soil and the changing seasons. To understand the sharp wit of Aristophanes, we must first journey back to the rural villages of ancient Greece, where comedy began not as a critique of power, but as a plea for life itself. Scholars like F.M. Cornford traced the lineage of Greek comedy back to boisterous fertility rituals and the singing of phallic songs. These were not subtle performances. They were raw, exuberant, and deeply humorous celebrations aimed at ensuring a good harvest and the community's continued vitality. The humor was physical, joyous, and collective, a form of magical thinking where laughter and lewdness were believed to literally coax the earth into productivity. Over centuries, these rustic, localized celebrations were gradually brought into the city. They were formalized, given a chorus, a plot, and a designated place in the great civic festivals of Athens like the Dionysia. What was once a village rite became a structured competition, with prizes awarded for the best comedy. This evolution transformed humor from a communal ritual into a tool for civic engagement, yet it never fully lost its connection to that earlier, chaotic spirit of celebration. A parallel transformation occurred in Rome, though it followed a uniquely Roman path. The very word satire or satira hints at its origins. It likely referred to a lank satira, a full or mixed dish of offerings, a metaphor for a literary form that was itself a medley. Early Roman satire was a hodgepodge of elements, perhaps blending street performances, musical interludes, and sharp conversational monologues. It was the poet Aeneas who first began to refine this chaotic mix into a more coherent literary style. But it was Lucilius, a century later, who truly forged satire into the weapon we recognize today. He took the scattered ingredients of the past and sharpened them into a personalized, aggressive form of social critique. He fearlessly attacked the prominent figures of his day, writing in a conversational tone that felt like an overheard conversation in the forum. This was the crucial shift, the moment when satire evolved from a general entertainment into a specific, pointed art form with a clear mission to expose vice and folly. This evolutionary perspective reveals a profound truth about ancient humor. It was never a static monument, but a living, breathing force that dynamically adapted to the needs of its society. The same impulse that once drove farmers to sing bawdy songs for a bountiful harvest was later channeled by playwrights to question the decisions of generals. The communal energy of a village festival was refined by poets into a personalized mirror held up to the corrupt and the powerful. Humor transformed from a tool for ensuring survival into an instrument for defining civilization itself, proving that the desire to laugh and to laugh at the powerful is one of humanity's most enduring and adaptable traits. For a Roman lawyer, the courtroom was a stage, and Cicero was its greatest performer. His weapon of choice was not just legal precedent, but a perfectly timed, devastatingly personal joke. In his prosecution of Gaius Verres, a corrupt governor of Sicily, Cicero did not simply list the man's crimes. He turned Verres himself into a punchline, mocking his greed, his taste, and even his name, which he quipped was fitting because Verres means boar, an animal that roots up and destroys everything in its path. He described Verres not as a formidable adversary but as a ridiculous figure, a man so consumed by avarice that he would pilfer trinkets from provincial homes with the clumsy desperation of a thief in a farce. This was a deliberate strategy. By making the jury laugh at Verres, Cicero made it impossible for them to respect him or fear his powerful political allies. The humor served a precise legal function. It dismantled the defendant's authority before a single piece of evidence was formally presented. But this tactic was a dangerous high-wire act. The humor had to be perfectly calibrated to the sensibilities of the jury, a mix of senators and wealthy businessmen. An insult that was too crude or a joke that missed its mark could backfire, making Cicero seem malicious rather than witty. His success hinged on his deep understanding of Roman social codes, allowing him to push right to the edge of propriety without ever falling over. In doing so, he transformed a dry legal proceeding into a gripping dramatic spectacle, where the laughter of the crowd became a form of verdict in itself. Cicero proved that in the right hands, a joke was not a distraction from the law, it was a powerful instrument of it, a reminder that persuasion often works best when it first wins a smile. But this same laughter that could challenge a tyrant could also become a weapon for the tyrant's use. In the vast machinery of ancient empires, humor was sharpened into a tool for conquest, a way to mock and diminish those brought under imperial control. Roman artists and writers became masters of this cruel craft, crafting caricatures of conquered peoples that emphasized their supposed barbarism or absurdity. A Germanic warrior might be depicted on a monument not as a formidable foe, but as a shaggy, bewildered savage, his hair wild and his posture clumsy. An Egyptian might be shown with exaggerated features, his customs rendered as laughable superstitions. These were not attempts at understanding. They were deliberate distortions designed for a Roman audience to chuckle at, reinforcing a sense of cultural and military superiority. The poet Juvenal, in his tirades against the foreign influences he felt were polluting Rome, frequently resorted to this kind of ethnic mockery, portraying entire groups with a broad, scornful brush. The grand spiral of Trajan's column, celebrating the emperor's victories in Dacia, is a permanent gallery of this propaganda. The Dacian enemies are often shown in states of disarray and defeat, their expressions foolish or desperate, while Roman soldiers stand in disciplined, heroic poses. The message was unmistakable and repeated for every citizen who looked up. Our civilization is orderly and mighty, theirs is chaotic and laughable. This humor was a powerful psychological lever. By turning real people with complex cultures into simple comic stereotypes, it made the violence of conquest and the reality of subjugation easier to stomach for the average Roman. It dehumanized the other, transforming them from human beings into punchlines, and in doing so, it justified the entire imperial project. This dark strand woven through the history of ancient laughter serves as a crucial reminder that comedy is never inherently moral. Its power to unite a community could be twisted to exclude and oppress another. proving that a joke could build walls just as effectively as it could tear them down. The collapse of Rome's empire did not extinguish the laughter it had cultivated for centuries. Instead, the traditions of ancient humor found new life, evolving and adapting to shape the cultural landscape of Europe for 1,000 years. The most direct link to this past was the court jester, a fixture in medieval castles and royal courts. This figure was the clear inheritor of the Roman scura, the professional fool who offered witty barbs, and even the sanctioned clowns of the Egyptian pharaohs. Granted a unique license through their perceived foolishness, the jester could speak truths to kings and queens that would have cost a nobleman his head. Their antics, their riddles, and their seemingly innocent songs often carried a sharp edge of social critique, a direct echo of the sanctioned mockery that had once flowed through Athenian theaters and Roman forums. This was not a new invention but a repurposing of an ancient tool for a new, feudal world, proving that the need for a safety valve within power structures was a constant. This thread of classical influence was pulled taut during the Renaissance, as scholars rediscovered the wit of ancient authors. The Dutch humanist Erasmus, for instance, was deeply inspired by the Greek satirist Lucian. In his masterpiece, In Praise of Folly, Erasmus did not write a dry philosophical treatise. Instead, he handed the narrative over to the goddess Folly herself, who, wearing the cap and bells of a jester, delivers a brilliant and hilarious sermon praising her own influence over all humanity, from simple peasants to the highest church officials. This was satire in the purest Roman tradition, using a humorous persona to launch a devastating critique of corruption and hypocrisy, particularly within the church. It demonstrated how Renaissance thinkers were not just rediscovering classical art and science, but also its sophisticated methods of using laughter as a weapon for reform. The structural DNA of ancient comedy was also reborn on the stages of early modern Europe. Playwrights like Shakespeare and Molière did not need to invent comedy from scratch. They had the blueprints of Plautus and Terence. The familiar stock characters, the clever servant, the braggart soldier, the miserly old man, strutted directly from Roman plays onto the Elizabethan and French stages. The intricate plots based on mistaken identities, long-lost children, and clever deceptions, all staples of Roman new comedy, were refined and enriched by these later masters. When you watch a Shakespearean comedy filled with witty wordplay and chaotic romantic entanglements, you are witnessing the direct legacy of a 2,000-year-old tradition. This continuity reveals a profound truth, that the ancient world's exploration of humor's power established fundamental patterns, templates for holding a mirror to society that artists and thinkers would instinctively draw upon for centuries to come. This vibrant world of jest and satire we can reconstruct is merely a flickering torch in a vast cavern of silence. For all the plays, poems, and graffiti we have recovered, they represent only the tiniest fraction of the laughter that once echoed through the ancient world. The comedies of Aristophanes are famous, but we know he wrote about 40 plays and only 11 survive intact. His great rival, Cratinus, was considered a genius in his day, yet his work exists only in fragments, tantalizing scraps of what was surely a brilliant and biting wit. The true scale of this loss is almost unimaginable. Think of the hundreds of comedies performed in Athens alone, each one a complex tapestry of inside jokes, political commentary, and cultural references that were the talk of the town for weeks. They are almost all gone, their punchlines lost to fire, decay, and the simple neglect of time. But the silence is even deeper when we listen for the humor of the common people. The spontaneous wit traded between soldiers on a long march, the lullabies and silly rhymes mothers sang to their children, the hilarious stories Celtic bards recited from memory for generations before a single scribe ever wrote them down. These are the true ghosts of history's laughter. This was a living, breathing oral tradition that formed the bedrock of daily life, and it has vanished almost without a trace. We can study a Roman joke book, but we cannot hear the tone of voice, the pregnant pause, the burst of laughter that followed. The historical record is brutally skewed toward the literate and the powerful. The jokes that made a pharaoh smile were recorded, while the jokes that made an entire village roar with laughter died with the last person who remembered them. This profound loss is not just an academic gap, it is a poignant reminder of the humanity that slips through the cracks of history. It forces us to confront the fact that our understanding of the past is built on a foundation of privilege, on what was deemed important enough to be preserved by stone, papyrus, or parchment. The true, full spectrum of ancient humor, from the highbrow to the utterly vulgar, from the sacred to the deeply personal, remains one of history's great unsolvable mysteries. It invites us to listen carefully to the silence, to imagine the countless voices and the waves of laughter that have long since faded from the air, leaving behind only the faintest of echoes in the texts and artifacts that survived. The same comedic instinct that fueled Aristophanes now animates the sharp pen of a modern political cartoonist. When a contemporary artist draws a world leader with absurdly exaggerated features or places them in a ridiculous scenario, they are walking a path first carved in ancient Athens. The fundamental goal is identical: to strip away the aura of untouchable authority and expose the human flaws beneath, using laughter as a tool for accountability. This ancient practice did not fade with the papyrus scroll. It evolved, finding a new home in the daily newspapers and later on television screens. The monologues of late-night comedians, dissecting the day's political follies with a smirk and a punchline, function as a direct descendant of the Roman satirist's verse, translating Juvenal's indignation into a format for a mass audience. The mechanism is timeless. Ridicule remains one of the most effective ways to challenge power because it bypasses intellectual arguments and appeals directly to our shared sense of the absurd. A politician can rebut a policy critique, but it is far more difficult to recover from being successfully portrayed as a clown. This is why those in power so often try to control or suppress satire. They understand its unique ability to undermine their credibility not through force, but through a laugh. The anonymous Pasquinades of Renaissance Rome have found their 21st century equivalent in the viral internet meme. A clever image macro or a short, looping video can spread across the globe in hours, mocking a CEO or a president with the same swift, decentralized efficiency as a poem pinned to a statue under cover of darkness. This digital echo of an ancient tradition highlights a permanent tension in any society: the struggle between the desire of the powerful to control their image and the irrepressible human urge to mock that very desire. Recognizing this deep historical lineage does more than just connect us to the past. It frames our current debates about free speech and the limits of comedy in a new light. The question of whether a joke goes too far is not a modern invention. It is the same dilemma that forced Aristophanes into court and sent Ovid into exile. This long conversation between humor and authority is not a sign of societal breakdown, but rather a hallmark of a civilization grappling with its own complexities, proving that the freedom to laugh at power is a vital sign of a society's health. Our journey confirms that humor was a sophisticated social technology, as vital to ancient societies as law or religion. In the rigid court of the pharaoh, laughter was carefully managed to reinforce the divine hierarchy, while in democratic Athens, it became a public tool for holding leaders accountable. The Roman world channeled its frustrations through the savage verse of Juvenal and the chaotic release of the Saturnalia, proving that comedy could serve as a crucial pressure valve for an entire empire. This was a force wielded by philosophers to debate ethics, by orators like Cicero to win cases, and by everyday people to find solace in hardship. The echoes of this ancient wit are unmistakable in our own world. The political cartoonist's pen follows the same path as the anonymous Pasquinades pinned to the statue of Pasquino, and the structure of a modern sitcom still bears the genetic blueprint of a play by Plautus. This direct lineage reminds us that the impulse to laugh at ourselves and our leaders is a timeless strand of the human experience. As we navigate the complexities of our own era, perhaps the greatest lesson from the past is the nuanced understanding that laughter holds a dual nature. It can unite a community or divide it, challenge tyranny or reinforce it, wound deeply or heal invisible scars. The ancients mastered this power not by fearing it, but by weaving it into the very fabric of their civic and private lives. What joke from history has stuck with you? Share your favorite ancient anecdote in the comments and subscribe for more journeys into the mysteries of the past.